If you love what we do on the Greyhorn Pagans podcast, why not subscribe to us on Patreon? On patreon.com/Greyhorn Pagans, you can get early access to all of our episodes, join the Greyhorn Pagans book club, and of course get extra episodes, extra content, and have a say in what I will cover next. Go to patreon.com/Greyhorn Pagans and subscribe to a tier of your liking now.
Mighty Thor, with hammer in hand, strike down the foe, protect this land. Odin, All-Father, seeker of wisdom, guide our souls to the sacred rhythm. Frigg, queen of the hearth and home, with love and grace make us whole. Turn the trust with your iron might, guide us through the darkened night. Hell, the mistress of life and death, show us the path with every breath. Freya, goddess of love and war, we honor you now and forevermore. Faeru, Urus, to these stars, we call the runes, we seek your cause. Ansus, the right Arcanas, we say, guide our path, light our way. Lagos, Hagalas, northeast we sing, our spirits rise on the winds of spring. Kisa, Jera, purple we trust, in the runes, in the north we must.
Welcome back to the Greyhorn Pagans podcast. Thank you all for joining me once again on this lovely day, lovely evening it is here. I have with me Mr. Steven Kubacki. He has a really awesome story. Quite the story, I'd say. But I mean, who better to explain than Steven himself? So, Steven, thank you very much for coming on. And for those who may not be familiar with you yet, and they will be after this, tell us, what do you do? What are you about? What's your secret?
Oh, my secrets. Well, we all have lots of secrets. So no,
That's true.
They keep going on and on and on. So as you go down the rabbit hole, I just recently published a book. It's called The Disappearance, Conspiracy, Revolution, Revelation, The Extraordinary Disappearance of Steven Kubacki, Pete, after 45 years of silence. So in this book, I talk about my disappearance in 1978 for 15 months. I haven't talked about it for over 45 years, except for perhaps a few friends and family. And I decided I wanted to get this out and talk about all kinds of all those experiences at those times. And of course, as writing it, I kind of wrote it as a more 45 years later. So I've changed a little bit since then. And so I have some different perspectives on it. And so that's, so I guess we could talk about that book if you'd like to, or other things.
Yeah, I mean, your book, the whole situation, because you said you disappeared for 15 months. Disappeared how? In what way? Because there are many kinds.
Yeah. Well, I disappeared on the ice of Lake Michigan. So I was a student at Hope College, and I cross-country skied as far as I could out into the lake, which was frozen. It was a very cold day. A winter storm was coming that evening. And then I left my skis and my backpack pretty far out. It went over there's a bunch of the way the Lake Michigan is when it freezes over, it creates these ridges that go out pretty far. And I went as far as I felt I could. That was somewhat safe. I've done that before. Been doing a lot of cross-country skiing. And then I had this experience of kind of entering another dimension. It was I was disappearing because I was part of an organization we called the Nexalistic Revolutionary Front. So I and a few other colleagues decided that we wanted me to go underground to develop an organization, kind of call it a call to political and economic resistance. In order to do that, we decided I would go out in Lake Michigan and plant my skis, disappear, and I would leave my name behind and come back as Nathan T. Stanfield. That was my name for 15 months. But on the ice, something unexpected happened. I was in this very heightened state of awareness. I was about to do kind of the unthinkable, disappear for 15 months, leave my family and friends, which I still, even to this day, I still feel guilty about. I mean, after I reemerged, we did talk with my parents and family, and we kind of worked it out. They were just happy to have me back. But on the ice, I had this really extraordinary, intense experience of disappearing. And under that kind of pressure, I guess people psychologically might call it dissociative experience. I think in the multiverse way of thinking about it, I kind of bifurcated. There was kind of a me that walked off the ice as Nathan T. Stanfield. And I also experienced going into another dimension. And in this dimension, it was just, I met these beings of light, kind of in an energy shell. And it took a long time to kind of remember all that, to kind of get it all back. It took many years. And that presence is still with me, you might say. In a way, I wasn't picked up by a flying saucer, okay? That's not my experience, okay? And if you look at kind of tribal societies, it's very natural for people to be connected with other dimensions, other universes, other timelines and realities. And so I kind of try to think of things in those terms, in terms of the multiverse. And I think, I think that's happening to us all the time. We're entering dream states all the time, and dreams we're dissociating. Some dreams are just normal dreams. Some dreams, I think we are in other universes, other places, other realities. We daydream. Actually, we dissociate a tremendous amount all the time. We're not as present as we like to think we are. We have conversations in our head. We drive places. We don't know how we got there. I mean, we're constantly kind of elsewhere in some way. So I think we are in many places at the same time, but we're oftentimes just not very aware of that.
That is very true. That is very true. If you think about it, we are more somewhere else or in some other timeline, perhaps. Always thinking about, about the past, about what we could have done, or worrying about the future. It's very, very rare that we're actually in the here and now. So yeah, in that way, we are often somewhere else. You mentioned you find yourself in another realm. Can you, what kind of realm was that? I mean, light beings in a shell. I can make kind of a mental picture with that. But what kind of realm? Well, did it feel like? From what I've gathered over the years, is that it's more a feeling than a perception of some kind.
Well, it was a feeling of, I don't know if I'd call it joy, but a feeling of real connectedness. And I think when we really feel connected, oftentimes that brings about real positive emotions. When we're disconnected, we have more negative emotions. I happen to be a clinical psychologist. So if I get a little psychological, excuse me, but that's part of my training. And I'm also, I've studied a lot of philosophy and a lot of other things. I felt kind of really, at peace there. And there was these beings of light, and we communicated. They took on different shapes. I also became at times kind of a being of light. And there were kind of colors, and there was a sort of communication through light. I don't know really how to explain it well, but it was as if information was being carried through the light, and it was this sort of like energy shell. I don't know how else to describe it. It wasn't, anything we would call material, but yet it had sort of a form, you might say. I think sometimes what happens with people is, when we enter these sort of places, how we experience them has a lot to do with our background, with our personal history, with our culture. Someone else might have seen angels, other people who, if people aren't prepared for this or haven't studied or thought about it, because our culture is not very spiritually connected, is not into, other dimensions and things. And I mean, more so kind of, there's a lot of it on the media for sure. Yeah. But, when you talk to people personally, they're willing to tell you all kinds of things. But in public, most people still feel pretty kind of embarrassed about it all. and are pretty reticent to talk about these things, even though I think they're quite prevalent. What I was trying to get to is that someone who's very terrified of what's happening to them because they don't have any context for it, might project that fear out into what they're seeing and see something as being menacing when in fact it isn't. That happens oftentimes in dreams too. We'll have something shadowy or something after us, and in the kind of Jungian psychology perspective, that might be part of us that's trying to integrate, but we're terrified of the integration because it means change, and so we see it as something negative, something out to kill us, something out, and so I think that's part of the problem with a lot of experiences in other realities and alternative universes, is kind of what we bring in.
Yeah, no, that absolutely makes sense, and you can tie that into many ideas. One of the more prevalent one that I've, well, maybe not prevalent, but one of the more brainy ones, perhaps, is that heaven and hell are not realms, but more states of mind, if you will, and how you described it, projecting what you're expecting outwards. It absolutely makes sense, and I love that you mentioned Jung. I am quite a fan of his work and his way of thinking about things. I do like it, and indeed the shadow self, it's can be scary sometimes.
Yeah, I have this
sure.
sense of dark presence following me through my life, and during the disappearance, it kind of manifests itself in something I call the dark monk, which is this sort of archetypal, kind of connected with me. It's an energy that's about control and power and kind of a ruthlessness. Because part of my job, and when I was going underground, was to create a resistance to a cadre of people who would try to challenge the authoritarian institutions we are. Because our goal, we wanted to democratize everything. I mean, we don't realize how much we spend our time in authoritarian institutions with very little voice. We don't live in, we vote every 2 or 4 years, but most of the time we're pretty much in authoritarian institutions. So anyways, that was part of why I disappeared. Being, the shadow stuff I think is very important, but I think we can look at things at kind of multiple levels. So, one way you can look at things is psychologically. You can look at it in terms of Jungian stuff. So I thought that my only major issue with Jungian psychology is it seemed to try to replace the transcendental, tried to replace what people would call the spiritual, or what I think of as the multiverse, as being purely psychological. And I think there are psychological factors involved. You can also look at it kind of in psychodynamic or even psychoanalytic. I mean, I was a pretty angry guy. There's a lot of, you don't disappear just because, you're having a good time in your life. There was a lot of abuse in my past and a lot of rage. And, and then I think one of the things that kind of brought me into that was I went to a prep school, a very prestigious prep school, Deerfield Academy. And I came from a lower middle class family. My father worked in factories all his life. And at the age of 13, I was working out in tobacco fields, for the summer, so I could buy clothes, so I could have my suit and my tie and go to Deerfield, But I was surrounded by people, who had tremendous wealth, and the world was their oyster. There was no doubt in their mind they could do anything they wanted. What did they do for summers? Well, they went to Switzerland and went to, camp. So I saw this incredible disparity between the have and have-nots, and I think that's also what kind of drove me and also got me pretty angry. And I think, and gets a lot of people to this day very angry. So, there are a lot of different elements going on about my disappearance.
So what do you think you were the one who was chosen to be taken in a way, or to have walked into a different dimension through some sort of a portal? Why you out of everyone?
Well, I did have some, I did have some experiences before then. I spent a lot of time training myself in meditation and some shamanic practices. I also did some drugs, some LSD, and those were quite remarkable experiences of kind of being in many places again at the same time, traveling through the universe. One experience of just eating colors and kind of seeing myself in different colors, and that reminded me of all the different Buddhas who are different colors. And I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I had something before then, and then also I think I'm the one who kind of led the group, you might say. We were all, pretty free thinker. Everybody in the group was an amazing person, but we all, I think it's unusual to get the people who were involved in the original conspiracy probably would never get together. And for some reason, we all got together, and it just felt a little bit like destiny, like there was a calling, a transcendental calling for us to do this. And I've always felt I was on some sort of kind of mission throughout my life, and I just was sort of part of it. So, I guess I was the one who stepped forward, because I guess in some ways I'm the one who kind of came up with the idea of the disappearance and then how we would formulate things, and we all got together, and then we get into the political, there was a left arm and a right arm. I was going to be the left arm on the ground, and then the other conspirators were going to be the right arm and enter, one would go into finance and corporate world and make tons of money. Another person would go into religion and become somebody in, a leader within there. And then another person would go into politics. And then the goal at the end was we would all come together, and we would, be very different from other revolutions, because there would be a legitimate part, and there would be this sort of underground part. And together we thought that would be different from what had happened before.
That's a very, very good idea. That's a very, very powerful way of getting things done. That sounds like it would have definitely worked.
Well, who knows? I mean, it's, a lot of these things in history, people have all kinds of great ideas. There's an incredible book called The Roots of Revolution by Franco Venturi that I read decades ago. I remember it now, but it talks about all the attempts to overthrow the Tsar in Russia. And there were hundreds of attempts from the 1850s all the way to the time that Lenin took over. There were, constant attempts, and each time, people thought they'd be successful, and they weren't. And eventually, Lenin was successful. But there's lots of, history is kind of funny, because, we have plans, we have ideas, but history is impossible to predict. There's just too many variables to know what's going to happen. And I think a lot of things where people are successful, they're the right place, the right time, all kinds of synchronicities have to happen, I think. Of course, if you are born in a family where you've got a lot of money and inheritance and things like that, then, maybe your path's a little easier. But at the same time, you get absorbed. You're sucked into the system.
Yeah. No, absolutely. History is complicated, and we try to learn from it, but seem to really fail at that oftentimes.
Right.
Even though everyone says, well, history has a tendency to repeat itself, and we should learn from history. Okay, so why don't we?
That's it. Right. Why don't we? Well, we can see patterns, but at best we see patterns, and we have a sense of things that might go on, but it's very hard to predict. Who could have predicted the computer and the internet? And it goes on and on and on.
True.
That changes society. And I don't mean to go down this rabbit hole, but this is why economics is really a total pseudoscience, because it tries to predict the future and it can't. There's just too many variables.
Yeah.
There's lots of other wrong things about, the theory, economics and what it's based on. But one is that it is a pseudoscience. You get 200 economists together, each make a prediction of the future. One's right and gets the Nobel Prize. So
she's going to make sure that you're the one that's right.
Statistically, somebody will be right.
That's true. Yeah.
Or someday the stock market is going to crash. It's going to crash. It's going to, well, yeah, okay. Well, someday the solar system, the sun will go nova. Okay. Well, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, take a long enough time span and everything will eventually happen.
Right.
I do like that idea. I just yesterday watched some videos about that, and also just how space is so infinitely large that everything exists and every version of you exists somewhere, which is a nice tie into the question that I wanted to ask. You said that there was a version of you that did walk off the ice. How did that work? Because there was it, well, let's say Steven that went into that realm, and then your alter ego or whatever it
Well, my
was
other, yeah,
supposed to
well,
be.
Nathan went off the ice. We're kind of the same person, but
Mm-hmm.
in the multiverse idea, there was sort of this bifurcation that went on. I think it's happening all the time, but we're just not aware of it. And people are more likely to have these experiences under intense situations. Sometimes it can be, obviously pretty negative, like, traumatic, where somebody's, PTSD kind of thing, or rape or something. People can dissociate and go somewhere else. And that, from a shamanic perspective, that can lead to what's called soul loss. And psychologically, we think of it as repression, and the trauma gets buried and repeats itself. But it can also go in the opposite direction. People can have incredibly positive energy going on that might lead them into having visions or getting into other universes or other realities. So I think it can happen but I think it's happening a lot. We're just not aware of it. In terms of multiverse theory, we're in many places at the same time, and in quantum mechanics, there is, things can be kind of timeless, and there's an interesting concept. I'm sure maybe a lot of your audience knows about. It's called quantum entanglement. And in quantum entanglement, an electron in one place of the universe is connected to another electron, and whatever happens to that electron happens to this one instantaneously, faster than the speed of light. And there's a lot of interesting work being done in bio-quantum mechanics, kind of looking at how migrating birds go to the same place. And, there's this kind of entanglement thing going on. I think there's lots of different ways of thinking about the many us. Well, traditionally, people have thought in terms of reincarnation or past lives or future lives. I like to think of them all at the same time, and that kind of what we connect with has a lot to do with who we are, what we want. It's really interesting, when you talk to people about past lives, that they were a king or a queen or, something great.
Yeah.
They're never like some peasant, starving.
No, they were never just a simple
Yeah.
farmer.
Well, but why is that selected? I'm not saying that's being made up. I'm just saying, because of what people want and their intentions, this is what they connect with. And possibly it's, maybe it really is happening. But so, what we experience in the multiverse is very much limited by our knowledge, our histories and stuff. So, for the most part, existence is pretty incomprehensible.
Yeah, absolutely. We try to make sense of life, both biologically and just, day to day, but I don't think it is something that we will ever truly comprehend how life comes to be and why life is, etc. I mean, those are the great philosophers of all times have always pondered those questions. It's really the first question that everyone comes to. It's like, why is life? And you were gone for 15 months, you said?
Correct. Yeah, 15 months, and then I reemerged. It's kind of, there's lots of different ways of looking at my disappearance. And, I did, in a sense, for many people, die on the ice. I was presumed dead or missing. And part of the way of looking at the disappearance was, it was kind of a struggle within me, or with other, outside with archetypes or other dimensions, between kind of the good and the bad, the light and the dark. And at some point near the end, I had entered the French Foreign Legion, and I had a kind of a vision of what would I become if I was successful, and I would have become a total killer. I would have been, a pretty bad person, and I stared at the abyss, and I couldn't jump in, and I left. I got out of it before. I never really signed any papers to, become, because if you do that, you become a deserter. I never got to that point. Mm-hmm. But then I saw somebody brutally beaten up, and I had this vision of kind of my future, as a, in that, and it's just, terrible vision. It's in the book. And so, and so there's kind of a redemption quality to the whole story. And I changed my life dramatically after I reemerged, and became more focused on, my life has always sort of been about serving others, but that's why I decided to become a psychologist, to kind of help people individually, And I think one of the wrong things about what we did, if it was, it's kind of hard. You're just doing whatever you can as a young man. I mean, that's what I was trying to do. I was trying to do something good. And I think, young people are struggling these days. And maybe my book could be kind of aspirational in some way. But, one of the things I think didn't work out was the secrecy. I think I'm really an advocate now in total transparency. And I think that's what really will bring us together and create the kind of communication we need.
I agree. Yeah, there are too many secrets kept and too many secrets by just everyday people, not even, the ones up top, but everyday, just everyday people like you and me. Like, I mean, it's why I always, when I start the episode, I ask the question, what's your secret? It's kind of a joke, but I mean, we all have stories, we all have secrets, we all have things that we, we'll tell one person but not the other.
Right.
Like friend group A and friend group B and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, after 15 months, I can agree on, people thinking that you were no longer here. I mean, if you don't hear peep from anyone for 15 months and there's really no trace of him anywhere, then after a while, that's the logical conclusion to come to.
Yeah, except my mother. I have letters in there from my mother. She would write to me. They'll bring you to tears. They still bring me to tears. I have a lot of what I call documents, things I wrote and other people wrote that are in the book, and I think that makes it a lot more interesting. But yeah, my mother didn't believe I died. So she was out looking for me. She had detectives trying to find me. They weren't terribly successful. You got to back in the late 1970s. There really wasn't much of an internet. There really we didn't have the kind of surveillance we have now.
Yeah.
I had my passport and I could go wherever I wanted with my passport. And nothing ever happened. It's a very different world back then. It's you couldn't disappear now. Let's put it that way. At least the way I did it, it would be impossible. And travel internationally, it would be impossible. You would be nailed. You were nailed immediately at the airport.
Yeah, a mother's love. Yeah.
Yeah. She's a pretty remarkable person. Good writer too. The letters are, they're pretty cool.
Awesome.
Very sad though. I mean, it's very,
I mean, yeah, she thought that she'd lost you. She thought that she had lost her child. And I mean, I'm 33 years old now, and to my mother, I know it doesn't matter how old I am. I'll always be your child. I can be 330 for all she cares. I'll always be, her firstborn. Yeah, mother's love is something special. I even go as far as to say it's one of the most powerful forces in the world.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, so she was hunting me down, but it wasn't what, I don't know how close she was to finding me. I wasn't very, careful about any of it. Other than, my name was Nathan T. Stanfield, and I was pretty, good about keeping to that. And I did meet with my co-conspirators a couple times. Actually, there was one person I spent a tremendous amount of time with. And so, again, I would have been easily found. Back then, no.
Yeah. I mean, and 70s, yeah, that would have been different for sure. So, what made you come back after 15 months? Were you sent back? Did you decide? Was it some kind of mission that was fulfilled?
Well, I came back because what I wanted to do politically, economically, underground was something I couldn't do. I couldn't do it. I couldn't become the person I was supposed to become. And there was this big struggle through the 15 months of whether I would do it, not do it, become, kind of a criminal, you might say. I mean, I don't know, something not very good. But, that was the thinking we had back then. And I couldn't do it. So that's, especially when I was in the French Foreign Legion, I just, that's what tipped the scale. And I returned and told people, it's end. We're not, if people had different reactions to it who were involved. But at the same time, kind of what was going on in, me in this other place, there was always some kind of communication. And at times I still, I can, close my eyes and I can be back there. I can be, with these beings. I've had other experiences since then. I've done a lot of training. I mean, I became a clinical psychologist, and then also I did a lot of training in traditional methods of, meditation, shamanic journeying, and been practicing those. I do something I call constructive dissociation, where I can be hiking and then be somewhere else. Like another universe or something, or with the beings of light, or experiencing other things.
So astral travel,
Yeah, well,
in a way.
It's not. It's like I'm hiking and I'm just at the same time somewhere else.
Okay.
Like another dimension. Like I'm living in some other place and you work. There's been one place where it was beings that kind of morphed into, like it was all lava and red and kind of a high energetic, kind of a fiery kind of place, and the beings there were all kind of made of molten lava. I know that sounds kind of odd, but anyways, the thing is that we it's a training, and the ancient methods of meditation and journeying, we can all learn, and this is a way that we can access these other universe and dimensions. We don't have the technology to do that now. I mean, there's some evidence. There quantum mechanics and multiverse theory. It's at this moment all theory. In quantum mechanics, there are infinite number of universes and so on. But I think the way we can do it now is something what some physicists call quantum consciousness. That by meditating, we reduce our connections, our established connections in our brain, our neural nets, to become quieter. And we then can reach some state of what's called coherence, which enables us to kind of access the infinite and enter these other places through meditation. And then the opposite is, you might say, is through psychedelics, where the brain is overwhelmed with new sensations. All the neural nets in the brain are lighting up at the same time. And again, disturbs established thinking and gets you in this place of coherence where you can connect with things. So, there's just many different paths, but it is, we do it through our minds.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just don't, have the technology yet to do that. We don't have, like in Star Trek, warp drive, or we don't have it.
I mean,
but there's a lot of speculation that dark matter and dark energy might be some kind of collision from another universe or something. And there's even ideas now, as they keep going further and further out into the universe, it keeps getting bigger and bigger, and there's some thoughts, well, maybe there are other universes colliding with ours, or anyways, this is not common thinking now in modern physics. These are scientists who are thinking these things. Okay, now, there's a great book if people are really interested in the latest on the multiverse. It's by Halpern. It's called The Allure of the Multiverse. It gets into all the different ideas of what the multiverse might be.
I mean, it's interesting how you see that in like so many of the ancient religions, the ancient spiritual paths. I mean, I'm a Germanic polytheist myself, and my belief, my faith, like we have the world tree, and the realms on the Yggdrasil, all of them being, well, different dimensions, kind of, if you will, and you can't just travel from one to the other, but they are all connected to the world tree, to the world axis. And even I know of at least the underworld, Helheim, also having its shadow side. Good friend of mine, Matt Mura, he is really into the Kabbalah. He studies a lot of the Kabbalah, and he says, well, I think that's exactly what the Kabbalah teaches as well. It's not like you have the light side, you have the shadow side, the side that you see, the side that you don't see. Quantum entanglement I don't believe it's quantum entanglement exactly, but in the Germanic faith, that would be called the web of weird, UYRD, which is the web, quite literally, through which we are all connected. In the Jungian perspective, I believe that would be the connected consciousness, connected subconsciousness, something like that. I always get those terms mixed up, but he also believed and knew really that we are all connected in some way. So I personally, as a Germanic polytheist, I love how science is now kind of, you could say, catching up to it. Right.
No, I think that's I think that's right on. Yeah. there's just so many different ways of interpreting kind of these experiences. And this is where this can lead to lots of conflicts. And this is one of the problems with sort of the more ancient traditions is, people have been killed because you don't believe what somebody else believes, tremendous, lots of things. And I think the issue is that people think that there's something certain, that there is the truth or the truth. And it becomes dogmatic and it becomes oppressive. And I think what's going on really is we're having interpretations, and we should be more cognizant that these are interpretations and people have different interpretations, and to be respectful of those interpretations, but also not to try to oppress other people with your interpretations. I think this is, certainty, I think, is this new book I'm writing called The Multiverse Guides Humanity. It's almost finished. And one of the principles in there I talk about is the cognitive root of evil is certainty. If you look at evil, it always has this kind of certainty about it and an inability to see other perspectives or accept other perspectives. It's anti-diversity. It's non-ecological. And when you think of a good ecological system, there's lots of diversity, and it's a diversity in humanity. If we look at humanity as an ecosystem, it's the diversity that makes us a successful species. If we reduce that diversity, we become less adaptable, less successful.
Yeah, that's where you get the global homo idea from, that, everyone believes the same thing, dresses the same way, looks the same way. And for many people, that's their idea of peace, which I do not agree with. I find that idea, well, first of all, utterly dangerous, because there are many other things that you can connect to it. One of them definitely being eugenics, and just utterly boring. We all look the same way, we all dress the same way, we all like the same things. Please, no. It sounds so boring.
It is. And a famous philosopher, Hannah Arendt, wrote about evil. She was not coming in, and one of the things she argued about is that evil, one of the qualities is its banality, its boredom. It's banality and indifference that allows evil to work. It's our complacency, our banality, the kind of sense you're talking about, sameness and conformity, that allows kind of evil to flourish. And no, we're all very, very different, and actually making us all the same really reduces our adaptability. It ruins, destroys creativity. Just all kinds of things. But yeah, certainty, nobody want to get into this, but I, and a mathematician, developed two mathematical theorems that are based on Gödel's work. Gödel was a kind of a contemporary of Einstein. Hung out in Princeton with him. He's kind of a strange guy, but he developed two theorems. One is a theorem of inconsistency, the other one incompleteness. And what it argues mathematically, or proves mathematically, is that everything is incomplete and contradictory. There is no ultimate truth. There is no certainty. Everything is always changing and evolving. So whatever you think something is, there's something incomplete about it, means there's something outside it. There's something more to add to it. And when you add, then there's something more to that. And it keeps going on infinitely. And what we did is we developed a theorem where we took the idea of incompleteness and inconsistency and moved it infinitely through time and situations. So you have one universe. Well, there's something outside of that universe, something outside of that universe. And so then you end up with the proposition, mathematical proposition, that in order for anything to exist, everything established, imaginable, and unimaginable or incomprehensible must exist in some way. That we call that the theorem of totality. And to balance that, we also developed a theorem called theorem of boundary conditions. That in order for anything to exist, it must have structure and limitations. Our particular universe is not a fantasy novel. Okay, yeah, and there may be all kinds of things going on we don't see. I'm not going to argue around any of that. But in many ways, we don't have witches flying all over the place and angels. And, there's a lot of stuff going on that we don't,
not
maybe
here,
going
perhaps.
on that we don't see in terms, but our universe is not set up that way. We have certain boundaries, there's certain rules, there's certain laws, and they're all probabilistic. They can be bent and they can be broken, and changed. But there are limitations. And I was talking about before, based on our own personal histories, etc. That's what limits how we make sense of whatever we're experiencing in these other dimensions and universes.
Yeah.
Sorry,
No, no.
I used to be a professor for many years. I apologize.
It shows. No, I love these kinds of conversations. It's why I love doing the podcast, because I get to have these kinds of conversations. But yeah, I mean the whole personal beliefs thing, it also kind of goes into what my wife does. She is a death coach, death doula.
Interesting.
And yeah, it's not something you hear a lot, actually. I don't think I've heard about it before she went and wanted to do it. But she also adapts her work to the person, of course, if they're religious or non-religious or whatever religion it may be. So she has to be very flexible in that, because who knows who you see in your last moments. A Christian may see God, a Muslim may see Allah, or whoever sees whatever. You don't know, so she has to be really adaptive to it. I mean, luckily she's very spiritually open-minded and very magical being herself. But I do find that interesting, just the personal experience aspect of all of it. I do believe that scares a lot of people as well, because you have certain expectations of what you're supposed to be seeing, of what is supposed to be happening. And then you don't see it, or it's not happening. You're like, oh, but this is not how it's supposed to go.
Right.
So yeah, I do love that idea.
Yeah, it's neat that it's your wife who does that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, that's pretty amazing. Getting into all that, into people's views of the afterlife, or where they're going next, or whether it's another, they believe in the whatever it is they're into. I think that's pretty neat. It's pretty cool that what she does. Yeah, people can be very scared and kind of frightened. And what I found is when people get a sense of connecting, with something greater than they are, whatever that means, it usually brings about a sense of peace and a sense of, like, say, joy or something, so that death isn't so scary. I think one of the things that happened to me, this is after the disappearance, I was in this training. It was called, sounds a little odd, it was a way of combining energetic work, shamanism, with acupuncture. So I was learning how to do acupuncture, but energetically. And I was in this training, and I was told to go on top of this giant rock by some energies I was working with, and they kind of took my heart out, because they said I was so stupid that they had to work on me, had to protect my heart, and I was kind of a wreck. I was, I just felt really disconnected, and there's a lot of crying and drama, and then suddenly something just shifted, and I had this sense of my father and a variety of things, and there was a shift where I really felt like I was connected to the universe, that I was home in the universe. Maybe I wasn't home at wherever I was living, or at home here or there, but somehow the universe, all of existence, became kind of a home, and that sense of connectedness really resolved a lot of issues for me. I was no longer, I think it really shifted me, so I wasn't so fearful of death and other things like that.
Yeah, I understand that feeling completely. I mean, for me, that was Germanic polytheism. It's where I found structure, where I found something that I have always felt, I have always believed in, if you will, but now it had as I said, like, now it had a structure, it had a base from which I could build on.
Right.
Like, I do believe as a society, as a species, we need that base. We need something that we can build on top of, from which we can expand further, if you will, because it was also Germanic polytheism, a lot of, occult and mystical and esoteric ideas are woven into it. And it really allowed me to explore those, but have that base from which I could do that. So yeah, it's so important to have that connectedness, as you call it, whatever it may be, whatever helps you, helps you stay grounded, whatever helps you grow, really.
Right. One of the things that when people enter these other dimensions, sometimes these dimensions, beings, or wherever you're interacting with, sometimes they actually don't care about you. I think this is one of the problems with things, is some of this is impersonal. It's just like, you go in front of the sun, and it's a warm day and the sun warms you up. Do you think the sun is interested in you? No, you're accessing its energy. And it's warming you up. And yeah, we can anthropomorphize that and say, yeah, the sun is my buddy, and blah, blah, blah. Maybe you can have a communication with the sun. I'm not saying you can't. But the thing is that it's somewhat impersonal. And I think there's a tendency to over personalize and anthropomorphize sometimes things that are happening. Sometimes I think there are things in other universe and dimension that truly are interested in us, and there's a connection. And sometimes I don't think these things care one iota about us. We're just sort of accessing their energy or their power, So I think seeing, having some idea about, is this personal, is it impersonal, I think is an important thing. And then there's also, things out there that are not, necessarily have our best interest at our heart. Okay. I wouldn't say they're necessarily malicious. I don't know. The problem is we project things on stuff. So it's kind of hard to tell sometimes. But, I had a recent experience. I went to this, I won't go into it. To where it was. I don't want to get, but somebody was channeling some kind of spirit, and everybody was really into it. There's a group of people, and they kind of really were into it. But what I saw, and my wife, what I saw was an entity coming from some other dimension, and that it really wasn't what they thought it was. At least from my experience, I found it. People would ask it all kinds of questions and stuff, and it was pretty contemptuous. It was unfriendly. I thought it was just about power. It wasn't heartfelt, and I'm there. I don't want to have anything to do with this. But there were people who were really into it. They were really into it, and they got something out of it. But I didn't think it was. I thought it was very power based. And that's, something to think about. I mean, one of the things, people get into this, we can get into our own narcissism and grandiosity and all kinds of stuff. And some people are, when they connect with things, are in for it for the power. Heck, sorry, but there are people, but there are people who are more into the heartfelt and loving energy. But we need to, that's something just to be, think about. I don't know if that's been experiences with you or.
I have had one experience, and I recently talked about that in full for the first time on the podcast, actually. Oh. I was in a really, really bad mental space. I just broke up with the mother of my children. Oh. And, as always, or too often, let's say not always, but too often as that goes, it was a nasty breakup. And, she kept me away from the kids for a while, and I was just angry all the time. And I remember I believe I was coming home from the gym, because I had really no other way of channeling that energy. And I was listening to one of my favorite bands, actually, and that like a really good album of theirs. Parkway Drive is the band. It's a metalcore band from Australia, because for some reason when I'm angry music helps me. It helps me channel it better. Like when I'm angry, don't put on Mozart. I'll get even more angrier.
I don't care for Mozart. I won't go. I won't put Mozart down. I don't.
But I was so in my anger, in my rage, that I guess in a way I opened myself up to something, and there was just this rush that came over me of just this well, indeed, this grandiose feeling of power. Like I felt just like 10 times bigger than I was. And that scared, part of my French, but that scared the shit out of me.
Yeah.
And I have never had that experience since, but It's an experience I had. It's a lesson that I have learned. I've learned that there are things that out there, out wherever, that can provide you with that power if you
Right.
seek it. But I also know that if I would have given into it, that it wouldn't have worked out well for me. Because I know myself, and that wouldn't have worked out well. But I have definitely had a experience like that when it's
Yeah.
just about power or just feeling of
Yeah.
power. And I understand now why people do that. Why
Oh,
people want to
very
want to channel those
yeah,
beings.
yeah.
If you,
Uh-huh.
it's a lot. It feels.
It's very seductive. It's very
Oh
seductive
yeah.
to some people, and and doesn't mean they can't do good things with all of it. But there's always the downside. In my disappearance, well, similarly, I have this struggle with what I call the dark monk, and it's kind of, he called it ruthless compassionism. It's kind of the means justifies the ends, but it was all about doing what I was supposed to do and kind of getting into that power, getting into that sense of not caring, not really having empathy, or being able to not have empathy, and to be, he called it compassionate ruthlessness. I don't know. I think there's a major paradox between those two words. But
Yeah. No, but I understand. I
yeah,
understand.
yeah.
That's the end justifies the means. It's really and it's funny that you mentioned it when you also mentioned that you were the left arm
Yeah, the left.
of that society, because it's a really left-hand path way
Uh-huh.
of thinking, of doing things. So that's interesting. So the dark monk, I'm fascinated by that idea. Who or what is the dark monk? Is it merely the shadow side of yourself, or who
No,
is
I
it?
think it's much, much larger. I think it's I don't know, a force or an energy, something pretty power being in in the multiverse, and it's my sense of understanding it, gets my interpretation is that this was once a monk, and it was all about working with forces to bring about order and authority, and to change things, but it is this sense of ruthlessness. I keep repeating that. um, and it emerged when I was in Japan. It became that's kind of when it came, when I was in Japan doing some training in martial arts and some other things. And it was there to, I was supposed to discover that part of myself, which was important. It was important for me to discover that part of myself that was connected to this. And eventually I realized that it wasn't the right path, and I kind of rejected it. And there was another kind of being that I talk about, getting into just words we're using. I called the wandering monk, and that was something that was been throughout my life. It was something. It's kind of a monk that's out, very based on compassion and caring and altruism, but a monk that sort of wanders and does good here and does good there, but not affiliated necessarily with anything or any institution. Kind of in this sort of, I don't know, other dimension. And my life is, I kind of see myself as an explorer, a wanderer, and I'm always curious and want to learn new things. And like I said, I've kind of, a lot of my life I've kind of been there to serve others as a psychologist. And now in the last 10 years, I've been trying to kind of integrate a lot of my thinking way back then, which was more systems oriented, more about politics, economics, larger systems, and then bringing that in with kind of the multiverse, which is a kind of a big system idea, and connecting the macro with the micro, with the psychology. Because I think if people are going to change, we change both kind of psychologically and spiritually, but also we need to look at the larger system, because the systems have tremendous effects on us. If you're around people who are very negative and angry, and it's going to affect you over a period of time, even if you try to be as try to ignore it, or you try to deal with it. At some point that energy gets to you. And so we have to be real careful about what we surround ourselves with. The stimulus around us pulls us. It's like, if somebody's an alcoholic, what's going to happen when they go to a bar? The stimulus around them is going to pull them to drinking. They may not want to drink, but the stimulus will pull them to that. So what we surround ourselves with, the people, it has a tremendous effect on us.
Yeah.
So, choosing the people you want to be with is a very important choice. And sometimes people don't make those choices. They're made for them. You have a set of friends that, are sort of prescribed for you, or family, or and sometimes it can be very hard to change and evolve because you're kind of trapped.
Trapped in a loop. Sometimes it's also comfort because you know what's happening, you know what they're gonna do, you know how it's going to end.
Yeah, that's really interesting about the comfort. I don't mean it, but this is what makes it difficult to change, because somebody might be very depressed, and one of the hardest things with working with somebody who's very depressed, and this is not to blame the person, but they're attached to their depression. They don't want to let it go because it means going out into the world and all the uncertainty of not being who you are. It's better to stick with what's horrible and what and what you can control and what you can predict, even if it is miserable, than to go out and do something that's very frightening, because it involves dramatic change. So one of the most difficult things in therapy is getting people to sort of disidentify with those parts of themselves that are, you might say, harmful or malignant, and then to begin to open themselves. And that can be very difficult. It can be hard. And the same thing probably that goes on, when people are working spiritually or in the multiverse, people can get connected in different ways that may not be beneficial for them. But yet it's being predictable. And you're used to it.
Yeah. And there's also kind of, I want to do a show about that, or just a video about that. Kind of ties into what we're seeing a lot nowadays, or more of nowadays, I guess, the spiritual psychosis, really, or another form of it is toxic positivity, for example. Just, they are every being but human, often kind of going into the star seed thing, for example, or, toxic positivity. If I don't think about the darkness, if I don't think about the negativity, if I don't pay any attention to it, it doesn't exist. I've tried that, doesn't work. It catches up to you eventually.
Well, we're flawed. We're flawed creatures. We are, we're very complicated creatures. And, like you said, we just can't be Pollyannish, and we can't just think about that everything is good, because there's a lot of stuff that aren't good. I mean, a lot of the great reformers, revolutionaries in the world, whether they're political, economic, or whatever, solve things that are wrong. If you don't see things that are wrong, you can't change things. You've got to be somewhat angry or upset about things to change anything. Even Gandhi was somebody who got pretty angry and upset about things, he'd like to be generally in a place of peacefulness and positivity. And I think that's the place to be. That's the healthiest place to be. But we can't ignore our negative emotions. They're there for a reason. They're there for us to see what's wrong in the world and then to try to do something about it. Otherwise, you just maintain the status quo.
Yeah. Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely. I mean, just because it's not fun to see, just because it hurts, seeing those things, living through those things, it doesn't mean that there is no meaning to it.
Right.
Meaningless, nothing is meaningless. Everything has a meaning of some kind, and you may not at the moment that it happens, or even way after, know what the meaning is, but nothing is meaningless. That's why I can't get into the idea of some people thinking that life is meaningless. Well, if life is meaningless, then it shouldn't exist. Or if death is meaningless, then life is meaningless as well.
Yeah, nihilism is an issue I think the world struggles with. There's a lot of nihilistic thinking, very negative. I like a lot of the capacity for certain very smart people to be critical of what's going on. The problem generally, what I find, is I don't find any constructive solutions. People can be, this is wrong, and sometimes it's it's good. It's good to look at what's wrong with things. But coming up with constructive solutions is very difficult, and much harder. And I'd like to see more of that. I mean, there are people doing that clearly in all kinds of small ways, in their communities and in larger systems. But yeah, it's hard. It's hard not to be corrupted by money and power. Some people think
Yeah.
they existed, and maybe there are some people, but I think it's extremely hard to do that. I mean, some of the nicest people, generous people you meet are usually the poorest people, and
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of cliche-ish, but that I think there's a lot of
No,
truth.
it's true. It's true. And also, again, everyone has a price,
Yeah.
doesn't have to be money, can be anything.
Right.
Everyone has a price. Unfortunately, nihilism it's a trap, and it's easy to get lost into it, unfortunately.
Right.
I do the same thing that you do. I like to challenge just people, the people who are just screaming like, this is wrong and that's wrong and we should change this or we should change that. It's like, yeah, we should. But like, how are we going to do this?
Yeah,
Like, come up with something more constructive. It's like, yes, we should change it. Cool. Are you just going to, go on Twitter and say like, oh, we need to change this?
Well, it's a little bit, but you got to do more than that.
Yeah, no, exactly.
I mean, communication, one of the things, one of the problems in our modern world is that we can live in our heads. We can live in as if we're doing things. We watch sports, we watch entertainment, movies. These are all as if experiences, and we get out of touch with actually being able to have an effect on the world, to actually do things with the world, because we've been trained to be passive recipients of experiences. So it's as if we're doing this, as if this, but we're actually oftentimes not really going out and doing the things that we might be good for society and ourselves.
Which you try to change, almost, 50 years ago. Jeez.
Yeah. We were out to change the world. So, yeah, we were pretty dedicated, and there's a certain level of grandiosity, and we were young guys. I was 23. Okay,
Oh yeah, dude. You could take on the world at that age.
Well, you're that age. Young people are really struggling these days because they want to be able to do something, and they see all these roadblocks. It seems impossible. And then that leads to certain people, getting pretty psychologically messed up. And then they do very crazy things, very terrible things, killing people, going ballistic. It's a terrible thing. And, young people need to be able to feel they can change things, and do something. Otherwise, it leads to, anxiety is increasing in our society. There are more and more people are very anxious, less connected, and even though we have the internet and supposedly more connected in that kind of anonymous way.
Yeah. No, but I remember being in my early 20s, man, I could take on the world. I could do anything. I could do everything, and that's only like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can I just say I'm 70 now. Or am I 71? Anyways, at this age, I don't care anymore. So, throwing the dice again, I've thrown the dice all my life, and, to do things and take risks. And, that's when I decided, I'm 70. Who cares? I have nothing to hide anymore. That's why we talk about secrets and trying to be transparent and stuff. And so that's what I'm trying to do. And I'm hoping this can be helpful to others. That's what the book is really about, the disappearance book.
I'm sure it will, and I'm 100% sure it will. So where may the good people find your book? Where can they read all about it?
Yeah, if they want to find it, they can go on any bookseller, Barnes & Noble, Amazon. Just look up my name, Steven Kubacki. Just type in disappearance, they'll probably find it. They can go to my website, which is stevenkubacki.com, and on there's more about me and my past, and also some of the other books I'm working on, the books in progress, which I've talked a little bit about here. About the, more about the disappearance, so they can easily get on the link there. But it's not that hard to, get the book. I think it's on Kindle. It's a hardback. There's no audio version yet. I don't think. It should be coming out sometime in October.
Cool, nice. Yeah, and I'll I have to buy so many books. Just like it seems every one of my guests has a book out that I would love to read, but I also have, a life to live, work to do, kids to raise. wife to love. There's only so many hours in the day.
That's true. You got to make decisions of what to do and what not to do. It's very hard. It's one of the things that people I work with struggle with. Somebody wants to be a writer. Well, you got to create some blocks of time to write. It's just not magically going to happen. Or whatever you're interested in. And it's very hard for sometimes some people to say no to things.
Yeah, but if you're passionate about it,
yes,
you'll find time. And
yes, you're right. You got to find your inner passion. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for coming on. This was definitely a good conversation. I can definitely see that you have been a professor and that you are a studied man. I love to have these kinds of conversations. Makes me think, hopefully makes my audience think as well. Mm-hmm. And I'll, of course, make sure that all the links are in the description box down below. I always want to make sure that my guests are well represented as well.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I really enjoyed talking with you. It's been fun. You're very easy to talk with, and I don't know. You've got a great presence. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for the compliment. I'll take it.
Okay,
and
good.
Of course, for my lovely audience, thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all so much for listening. Do please remember to like, share, and subscribe, and make sure to hit that notification bell, because I know YouTube neglects to send out the notifications sometimes. Great having a great platform like that and then just not notify people. If you are listening to this on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, do leave us a 5-star rating. Do leave us leave us that 5-star rating. It's a small effort, means the world to us. And for more on the Greyhorn Pagans podcast, or the tribe of the Greyhorn Pagans, go to our website, www.greyhornpagans.com, where you can find everything from all of our podcasts, the team, tribes that we associate ourselves with, and more. And for further support, if you want to support us a little more, a little better, go to our Patreon, patreon.com/GreyhornPagans, because this is still, a full-time job next to my actual full-time job, and I would love if I can at least have it be a little worthwhile. So patreon.com/GreyhornPagans is where you can do that. Yeah, with all that said, this was it. I thank you all. Have a good evening, good night, whatever it may be for you, and I will see you all next time. Bye-bye, everyone. This was yet another amazing episode of the Greyhorn Pagans podcast. We thank you all for watching. We thank you all for listening. Remember to like, share, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you will be notified whenever we upload something new. Support us on Patreon for early access and for everything else that we do with the tribe, for everything else that we do with the podcast. Find us on www.greyhornpagans.com. For now, we thank you, and until next time.